Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to show you how to build a PC in the latest mid-tower case from Montech Sky 2. Now Montech cases have just been getting better and better with each one that I have been reviewing, and this case looks to be continuing that trend. It has an MSRP of only $99 for the black version that I've got here, and for that you're getting tempered glass on both the front and the side, 4 included ARGB fans, and front panel Type C. So on paper this looks to be an absolutely brilliant value. We'll see does it live up to that. So taking a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard I'm going to be using the ASUS ROG STRIX Z790E Gaming Wi-Fi. I've already done an unboxing and detailed overview of this motherboard, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. For the CPU I'm going to be using Intel's 13th Gen i7, the 13700K. Keeping our CPU cool, I'm going to be using Montech's latest air cooler. It's the Metal DT24 Premium, and this air cooler has a TDP of 270 watts, so should do a good job of keeping our 13700K cool. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast RGB DDR5 at 5600 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drive. It's from ADATA and it's their Legend 960 in 1TB capacity. This drive has read speeds of up to 7400 megabytes per second and write speeds of up to 6800 megabytes per second, so it should go well with our other high-end hardware. Powering the whole build, I've got an 850 watt gold fully modular power supply from Cooler Master. It's the V850 Gold Eye Multi. And the big reason I've gone with this power supply is it's an ATX 3.0 power supply with a 12 volt high power connector. For the graphics card I'm going to be using the Zotac Gaming RTX 4080 AMP Extreme AIRO. So this card not only looks great, but it should be an absolute beast in terms of performance. So looking forward to testing that out later on once we've got everything put together. So make sure you stick to the end of the video to check out the benchmarks. Okay, let's get building. I'm going to make a start by preparing the case. As we go, I'll point out the case's main features. To remove our tempered glass side panel, we've got 2 captive thumb screws at the back which we need to loosen. Once these have been loosened, the panel can be pulled back, tilted out and lifted away. Just before we remove our other side panel, I want to point out this area of perforation, indicating that we can side mount fans and radiators in this case. This panel is removed in exactly the same way. We've got 2 captive thumb screws at the back. Once these have been loosened, the panel can simply be pulled backwards, tilted out and lifted away. Taking a look at the back of the panel we've just removed, you'll notice we've got a magnetically attached dust filter. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power button, some indicator LEDs, we've got a button to control the case's built-in ARGB hub, we've got 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports, a separate headphone and microphone port, and a single USB Type C port. To remove the top panel, we've got a captive thumb screw at the back which we need to loosen. Once this has been loosened, the top panel can be pulled backwards and lifted up and away. Taking a look at the panel we've just removed, you'll notice there's no dust filter on the back of it, although as most people will have on the top of the case as an exhaust, a dust filter isn't required. With our top panel removed, we're now able to remove the front tempered glass panel by simply lifting it upwards. In the main body of the case we've got a fan. I'll remove it and show you it later on. So what I want to do now is orientate you in the case. In terms of CPU cooler height, it's up to a maximum height of 168mm. In terms of fan and radiator support, at the side of the case it's up to 2 120mm fans or up to a 240mm radiator. The case comes with 4 included case fans, and taking a look at these are ARGB fans with a nice ring around the outside of them, but if you look closely at the fan blades you'll notice these are actually reverse fans. So although you've got the front of the fan looking good in the main body of the case, in the current position they're actually going to be set to intake, bringing cool air into the case. At the rear of the case you can fit up to a 120mm fan or 120mm radiator, and you can see the 120mm ARGB fan that Montech included is a standard fan, so in this orientation it's going to be set to exhaust. At the top of the case you can fit up to 3 120 or 2 140mm fans or up to 360 or 280mm radiator. At the bottom of the case you can install up to 2 120mm fans, and Montech do include one 120mm ARGB reverse fan to be installed at the bottom. I'll show you how to install this later on, but there's long screws in the accessory box which you insert down through the fan into the holes at the bottom. Montech include 1 fan, but they do include 8 fan mounting screws, so you're going to be able to mount 1 here and 1 here. Although with a fan over here, you're going to get less benefit because your power supply is going to be blocking most of the airflow. Just while we're here, I want to point out the really nice cutout with a rubber grommet on it for bringing your PCIe cables to power your graphics card through. So in terms of mounting your graphics card, we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slots, and you're going to be able to fit absolutely massive graphic cards in the Sky 2, with graphics cards up to a maximum length of 400mm being supported. Because we've got bottom mounted fans, they're obviously going to need a source of airflow, and Montech have gone with a mesh panel on both the side and the front to deliver that. These panels are removable. We've got 2 screws on the top of the front panel which need to be removed to allow you to get it off. Once it's been removed, you'll see there's 2 screws at the front on the side panel, and there's 2 at the back on the side panel, and then once they've been removed, you're able to remove this side mesh panel. I'm not going to show you how to do that because there's absolutely no reason to remove them as far as I'm concerned. You'll notice down at the bottom of the case we've got a dust filter over the power supply's intake. It's a proper tray style dust filter which can be pulled out from the back for cleaning. Moving to the rear compartment, and it's good to see we've got rubber grommets over the 2 main cutouts to the right hand side of the motherboard, and we've got velcro cable straps to help with cable management. At the top of the case we've got a built-in fan stroke ARGB hub which has 6 3-pin 5V ARGB connectors and 6 4-pin PWM connectors. You can see our fans are already plugged into these, although just looking here, probably one of the PWM connectors should be plugged into this white connector in port 1 rather than the 3 end connectors. As I've mentioned, it's already connected up to a button on top of the case to allow you to control the ARGB effects. And as well, we've got both PWM and ARGB connectors coming from the hub to allow you to sync it up with your motherboard. Moving down the case, we've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounts. They're each held on with a captive thumb screw at the top. Once it's been loosened, the bracket can be tilted out, lifted away. You're going to set your SSD onto here, screw it into the back before returning it to the case. Moving down to the bottom of the case, we've got our hard drive tray here, and this is where we're going to get our case accessory box. So I'll remove it and I'll show you what it contains in a minute. As well, at the bottom, we've got our instruction manual. The hard drive cage at the bottom is removable. We've got a thumb screw here that we need to loosen. And once it's been loosened, we can pull the hard drive cage towards us, lift it up and out off the case. Taking a look at the bottom of the case, you'll notice the power supply has 2 different mounting locations, and we've got 2 holes here for securing it. Taking a look at the hard drive cage we've just removed, you'll notice at the top we've got a mounting slot for a 2.5-inch drive, while in the drive cage itself you can mount up to 2 3.5-inch drives. Our power supply is going to go down at the back, and the Sky 2 is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 210mm. Although if you remove the hard drive cage like I've done here, you've got absolutely loads of space for your power supply. Taking a look at the back of the case, there's no removable bracket for securing the power supply, so we are going to have to insert it in from the side. Taking a look at the case accessory box, and Montech have really excelled here. The screws come individually packaged, and not only individually packaged, individually labelled, so you're not going to have to worry about hunting through the instruction manual to find out what screw goes where. As well, they've included the standoff removal and insertion tool, as well as additional standoffs. You've got 8 screws for securing your fans at the bottom of the case, despite the fact that they only include 1 fan. We've got spare Velcro cable straps and absolutely loads of cable ties. We're now ready to start working the motherboard, so we're going to be installing our CPU, our M.2 SSD, our RAM, and even our CPU cooler before we put the motherboard into the case. So starting off with installing our CPU, we need to push this lever down to free it up and then bring it all the way to the top of the motherboard, and then we're going to be able to open the socket cover. We can then set our CPU into the socket. There's little notches in the top and the bottom to help line it up, and we're going to make sure the text is the correct way up. Once we're happy the CPU is lined up correctly in the socket, we can close this cover over, and I push down on this lever here, quite often the black bit of plastic will just pop off, and we'll put that into our motherboard box for safekeeping. And then to secure the CPU, all we need to do is close this lever down again. Moving on to install our M.2 drive, we've got 5 slots in this motherboard. The top one is a Gen 5 slot, while the bottom 4 are Gen 4 slots. If we do put a drive into this top slot, there is one issue, and that is the PCIe lanes for our graphics card are reduced from 16 to 8. So it makes sense because we've only got a Gen 4 drive to put it into one of the bottom slots. Now all these bottom 4 slots aren't created equally. This one here, the second one down, goes directly to the CPU, while the bottom 3 go via the chipset. So it makes sense for us to install our drive into this slot. So we need to remove the heatsink. It's held on with 2 screws. So we can then insert our drive into the slot at a slight angle, and then we flatten it down. We've got a little clip here that we're going to use to secure it. So what we need to do is push this clip over, and it's going to hold our drive into place. Just before we return our heatsink, we've got some plastic protection on the back that we're going to need to remove. We are now ready to install our RAM, so we're going to need to open the clips on the second and fourth slot along from the CPU. We can then line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure and the RAM is going to clip into place. And then the same thing with our second stick. Next, we're ready to install the backplate for our CPU cooler. So this is the LJ1700 backplate, and any of the hardware you're going to add onto it comes in a separate bag labelled 1700. So the first thing is one of these little plastic washers to go over each corner of the backplate. So it's just a matter of putting it over and pushing it all the way down to the bottom. Then we can turn the backplate over and line it up with the holes in the back of the motherboard. Then we've got one of these grey spacers to go over each corner. And then we've got another metal bracket to go over the top. What's important is the little notches here that you're going to screw into are at the top and bottom of the motherboard. And then we've got a thumb screw to go onto each corner. And then we can add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU, and thermal paste is included with the cooler. To install our CPU cooler, we're going to need to remove the top RGB plate, so it's just a matter of pushing it up towards the top, and then the plate can be lifted up. The cooler also comes with a middle fan in between the two heatsinks, so it's just a matter of removing it. So we'll push it along to the top, and then you'll see we've got holes here for the screwdriver to go through to secure the cooler down. Next, we can remove the plastic protection from the bottom of the cooler, and then we can lower the cooler down, lining it up with the bracket beneath. Then we can pass a screwdriver through the hole in the top of the CPU cooler, putting it down to the screw beneath. Then we can insert our middle fan back through the gap in the CPU cooler. And then just going to pass a little metal clip in through the holes on the fan, and then push the fan into place. Before I secure the fan with the clips, I'm just going to push the fan through the other side slightly so I can get access to the holes on this side. And then again, push the clip through the fans, and then we'll recenter the fan. To secure the fan to the heatsink, it's just a matter of pushing on this little clip here, and the clip will then catch on the heatsink. And then turning things around is just the same process on the other side. I'm just going to route the cable coming from our fan up towards the top of the motherboard. Then we can line up our front fan with the heatsink. Again, I'm just going to pass the metal clips through the holes on the fan and catch them onto the heatsink. And then it's exactly the same thing on the other side. So I've routed both the fan cables up to the top of the motherboard, and then I'm just going to join the two fan cables together via this splitter cable. Our CPU fan header is just here, so I'm going to get this cable plugged in. Then I'm just going to tuck all the excess cable out of the way. So we've got two options for plugging the AirGB cable coming from our CPU cooler in. We can plug it directly into an AirGB header on the motherboard, and I'll show you that way first of all, and then later on the build I'll show you how to plug it in to the AirGB hub at the back of the case once we've installed the motherboard into the case. Coming from the top of the cooler, we've got this 3-pin 5V AirGB cable, and we've got an AirGB header just here. And then again, I'm just going to tuck the cable in underneath the heatsink. And then we can replace the top plate on our CPU cooler, and we just need to push it forward until it clicks. We can then set the motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs beneath. You will probably find this a little bit easier if you line the case flat on its back. I'm only doing it this way to give you a good view of things. One thing you'll notice is once you've got the motherboard through the middle standoff, it helps hold the motherboard in place. And then we're going to secure the motherboard into place with the screws from the bag labelled Motherboard SSD. Next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. And then we can pull the excess cable through to the back. Down at the bottom of the motherboard we've got two RGB headers, so we'll plug the cable coming from our built-in RGB hub through and get it plugged into one of the headers. Next to that we've got a fan header, so I'm going to bring the cable from our fan hub through and get it plugged into here. And then again pull all the excess cable through to the back. Down at the bottom right hand side of the motherboard we've got the header for our front panel connectors. It's all the way over to the left hand side of this header that we're going to want to plug into. So we can bring the cable through the cutout and we're going to plug it in with the front panel text facing up the way. and then again pull the excess cable through to the back. We've then got our USB 3.0 header here, so we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line up with the header, and then push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. Just above that we've got the header for our Type-C cable, so again bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. So I'd mentioned earlier on I was going to show you the other option for plugging the RGB cable coming from our CPU cooler in to the hub at the back of the case. So I'm just going to remove it from the motherboard and then pass the cable through to the back of the case. Then at the top of the case we've got a spare RGB header here. We just need to remove the bit of protective plastic, and then we can line our cable up with the header and push it into place. And the advantage of doing it this way is whenever we press the button on the top of the case, it's going to change the lighting not only on the fans but also on the cooler. Next thing to do is install our power supply. It is fully modular, but I've plugged the cables in that we're going to need. So I plugged in a 24-pin cable. We've got two 8-pin EPS cables. We've got our 12-volt high power cable. If you don't have a new power supply that has one of these cables, you're going to need 3 PCIe cables. I'll show you the adapter you're going to use later on when we come on to our graphics card. As well as that, I've also plugged a SATA cable in because we're going to need SATA power for the hub at the back of our case, and our motherboard can connect to the power supply via USB cable, which I've also plugged in. So this is our power supply's intake fan, so we're going to want to install it facing down the way. And then we're going to use 4 of the screws from the bag labelled PSU PCIe to secure our power supply in at the back. Next thing to do is get our power supply cables plugged in. So we've got 2 8-pin EPS headers at the top left of the motherboard. So we can bring our cable through the cutout at the back, line it up with the header, and push into place. And our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here. So we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place. And then again pull the excess cable through to the back. We've got 2 USB 2.0 headers down at the bottom of the motherboard, so we'll bring the cable coming from our power supply through and get it plugged into one of those, and then again pull the excess cable through to the back. Last cable to plug in is the SATA cable coming from our fan hub, and we're going to plug it into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. Then we've got the bottom fan, so the first thing I'm going to do is pass the cables coming from it through to the back, and then we can set the fan up into position. And then we're going to use 4 of the long screws from the bag labelled fan screws to secure the fan to the case. So next we can get our cables plugged into our fan hub. Starting off with our PWM cables, you can see that our 3 fans that were already installed are plugged into ports 4 to 6. And for most fan hubs you want to have something installed into port 1, and the fact that this is white sets it apart from the other one. So it makes sense for us to plug this fan into port 1. And again, if you're not planning on installing this extra bottom fan, I would move one of these other fans into port number 1. And then for the RGB, we'll remove another protective cover, line the cable up with the header, and push into place. Next, we're ready to install our graphics card, so we're going to need to remove the 2nd, 3rd and 4th expansion slot cover. And one really cool thing about this ASUS motherboard, we have a little button over here which releases the clip on the top PCIe slot. So all you would need to do is press it in here. And this is really useful because once we've got our graphics card installed, it's going to completely block everything, particularly with a large air cooler, and it can be quite difficult to reach the clip here, so it's a really smart idea that ASUS have. We can then insert our graphics card into the case, line that up with the slot at the back, and then once we're happy everything is lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it's going to clip into place. And then we can resecure the graphics card to the case with the 3 screws we removed earlier on. We can then bring our 12-volt high power cable through this little cutout here. We're then going to line it up with the graphics card and push into place. And take real care when you're pushing this in to make sure it's inserted all the way. And then we'll pull the excess cable down to the bottom. And again, taking care to avoid bending the connector. So if you don't have one of the new ATX 3.0 power supplies, Zotac include this adapter in the box which you can use. So you've got a 12-volt high power connector on this side, and on the other end you've got a space where you can plug in 3 standard 8-pin PCIe cables. The other accessories you get with the graphics card are this adapter here. This end plugs into a little header here, and then you've got a standard 3-pin 5-volt RGB header on it, and then you could plug, for example, a light strip into this and have it sync up with your graphics card. The third accessory that comes with the graphics card is this GPU support bracket, and obviously given the card side it is going to be at risk of sagging. So this is magnetic, so it will just attach to the bottom of the case. You've got a little lever here which you're going to then lift up to a place where it's providing support to your graphics card, and then you've got a thumb screw on the end. You simply tighten and that's going to provide support to the graphics card. So you need to be really careful when using these GPU support brackets to make sure they're not actually catching on the fan blades. And you can see here actually in this position it is actually catching. The reason for that is the end of the card, it's really thin, the distance between the fan blades. And actually really probably where you want to install this is at the front here, where you have a large bit of card away from the fan blades and a gap between the two blades would be here. The problem is this is all where our fan is at the bottom. So we're going to have to choose between the fan at the bottom and the GPU support bracket. So this is only going to be a very short-term build for me, so I'm going to take this out and leave the graphics card as it is. It doesn't seem to be sagging at all. The case and motherboard are doing a great job of holding it in place. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management. So that's the build complete, and I've gone ahead and got the PC set up. If you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, get the RGB software installed and adjust it, how to enter the BIOS, update the BIOS, adjust the BIOS settings, I've made a video on that with another ASUS motherboard, and the process for this PC and that PC will be very, very similar. So putting this video together with that video, you should be able to get up and running, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. So the only issue I had with the PC was whenever I powered it on, the fans were incredibly noisy. And when I went into the BIOS, the case fans that were plugged into the case's built-in fan hub were running at 100%. And no matter what I adjusted in the BIOS settings, I couldn't get them to stop running at 100%. Now this is an issue that Montech are aware of in the pre-production versions of the case. There's a slight issue with the fan hub, and they're going to have it sorted out by the time that the case hits the market. So all I did was swap out the fan hub for a separate fan hub, and the fans came down and ran nice and quiet. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at the temperatures. So our 13700K idled at 38 degrees and reached a maximum of 98 degrees during a 10-minute AIDA64 stability test, with all components in the system being stressed. During that test there was some thermal throttling up to a maximum of 13%. Our Zotac RTX 4080 idled at 30 degrees and reached a maximum of only 67 degrees during the AIDA64 stability test. So once I got the issue sorted out with the fan hub and got the fans running on the standard motherboard fan curves, the PC was really quiet at idle. The CPU temperatures might sound high to you, and there was significant thermal throttling during the AIDA64 stability test, but the important thing to remember is that this is a really extreme test and isn't a real world test for what you're going to be using the PC most of the time. So whenever I was gaming on the PC, the CPU temperatures were running in the 60s and the GPU temperatures were in the 50s to the 60s, so well below what we were getting in the AIDA64 stability test. So moving on to take a look at the gaming benchmarks, and all games were tested at a resolution of 3440 by 1440 with graphics settings set to high. So starting off with Call of Duty Warzone 2, we had an average frame rate of 138. In Fortnite, we had an average frame rate of 172. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, using the game's built-in benchmark, we had an average frame rate of 237. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, again using the game's built-in benchmark, we had an average frame rate of 141. And finally, in Far Cry 6, again using the game's built-in benchmark, we had an average frame rate of 153. So the Zotac 4080 is an absolute beast, I absolutely loved playing in those really high frame rates on an ultra-wide monitor at 1440p with everything being buttery smooth. What I'm planning on doing now is a full case review. So you want to find out what I thought of this case, you're going to want to check that out. I'll put a link to that video in the description. If you have enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.